April of 1980 ended in disaster. 8 American servicemen were killed. The very next November, with Americans still held hostage overseas and inflation soaring at home, Jimmy Carter lost his re-election bid in a landslide to Ronald Reagan. Mr. Carter spent his final days in the White House negotiating the release of the hostages. After he left office. Jimmy Carter went on to have great success in his post-presidency. He established the Carter Center in Atlanta, working for peace around the world, and here at home, building houses for the needy through Habitat for Humanity.
I have this freedom to do things that I like to do and that an official of the U.S. government of nations cannot do.
He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 and remained one of the most active former presidents in history. In 2015, Mr. Carter announced he had cancer that had spread to his liver and his brain. Faith was a constant guiding force in the president's life, and during this time, he continued to teach his weekly Sunday school lesson.
All right, I'll see you wide awake.
Later that same year, he announced he was cancer-free and talked about it with us in 2018.
I was prepared to go, but things turned out for the better.
But that's an unusual thing, to prepare to say goodbye and then be granted a great deal more time.
That's true. Well, I've been very fortunate in many ways.
In October, surrounded by family and friends, Mr. Carter had his 100th birthday party in the backyard of his home in Plains, Georgia. Absent from celebration was his beloved wife, Rosalind, who passed away at the age of 96 almost a year earlier. The pair were the longest married first couple in American history. Mr. Carter reflected on their life together in the CBS Morning series, Note to Self.
One of your greatest sources of happiness will be your wife, Rosalind, and the growing family that will be coming. Stay close to all of them. Bring them together whenever possible, and provide them the same help and support that your own parents gave to you.
Tonight, President Biden called Jimmy Carter a remarkable leader, remembered for his simple decency.
There's millions of people all around the world, all over the world, feel they lost a friend as well, even though they never met him. And that's because Jimmy Carter lived a life measured not by words, but by his deeds.
Yeah, the president spoke from St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where he is on vacation. Meanwhile, tonight, President-elect Donald Trump on Truth Social wrote about Mr. Carter, saying, "We all owe him a debt of gratitude." Jimmy Carter had by far the longest post-presidency in U.S. history. It lasted 11 times as long as his single term in the White House. In that time, Carter became a model for what a former U.S. president could be and accomplish. Joining us now is Robert Costa, our chief election and campaign correspondent. Carter, as you know, Robert, was from the rural South. He grew up under segregationist laws. It was a way of life, yet he spoke up in defense of civil rights that really helped to change the course of the South. What was it about Jimmy Carter? Why do you think he did that?
Jerika, good to be with you. To step into Plains, Georgia, is to step into who Jimmy Carter was, someone who rose from a rural boyhood in the Deep South to become someone who ran for governor in Georgia and said that the time for racial discrimination is over, that when he made the inaugural address he had in January 1971, he cast the South in a new light, said he was going to break through the past, and that set the tone for what happened in 1976 when he ran for the White House as an outsider.
And let's talk about his ascent to the Oval Office. You know, how was he able to do it? I was reading up and looking at even how he was one of the first, the only Democrat to take Texas, but how he had that plain spokenness that people wanted to give him a chance, even though he only served one term. But tell us just more about his time at the White House.
Jerika, he was a total outsider who was not taken seriously by the Washington establishment. And when he announced, people said, Jimmy who? Who is this governor from Georgia who thinks he actually has a shot at the nomination? But he beat the establishment. He offered not only an outsider persona, but a new start for the Democratic Party and the nation after the plague of Watergate and the scandals of President Richard Nixon. And in 1976, he beat Gerald Ford, the incumbent president. That led to tensions in his presidency. He was someone who came came to the Capitol without the relationships in Congress, but he was always his own man, and he kept that outsider presence throughout his 4 years in Washington.
And while he had a complicated presidency, as we just heard in Nora's package, he'll likely be revered and really remembered for how he lived his life after leaving the White House.
His time after winning the presidency in 1976 was dominated by foreign policy and domestic policy. But you see in President Carter someone who, after he lost in 1980 to Ronald Reagan, was determined to not just retreat to Plains, Georgia, but to set the pace for what a post-presidency could be. He's someone who could really set a tone for peace in this country and be able to try to make sure that when it comes to peacemaking and working abroad on human rights and on health issues, he could be at the forefront of that global conversation.
And I think, Bob, really quickly, just commenting, too, on what he represented, when you look at him as a family man, married 77 years, dedicated to his wife and his children.